The being that emerged from the darkness on that sweltering July night in 1994 spoke with me until the first light of dawn crept over the ridgeline. What it revealed during those hours about the trajectory of human civilization made me question every assumption I had ever held about progress, about community, about what we were becoming as a species. By the time morning arrived and the creature retreated into the ancient hollows of the Appalachian forest, I understood with terrible clarity why they remained hidden from us. It was not because they feared capture or scientific examination. It was because they had observed us for countless generations and had witnessed something emerging in our evolution that frightened them far more than any weapon or laboratory cage ever could. My name is Eleanor Dawson, and in the summer of 1994, I was 51 years old, managing a 170-acre homestead in the remote highlands of West Virginia that my family had worked for 4 generations. My days followed the ancient patterns of the mountains and the seasons. I rose before the sun to tend to the apple orchards and the livestock. Afternoons were spent preserving food from the garden, mending fences along the steep hillsides, or repairing the equipment that kept our small operation running. Evenings found me reviewing ledgers by lamplight and listening to the radio crackling with news from a world that seemed increasingly foreign to my own. It was honest work, the kind that wore down your bones but kept your spirit intact. My husband Robert had passed 3 years earlier from a heart attack that took him without warning while he was splitting wood behind the barn. My grown children had scattered to distant cities, chasing careers and opportunities that the mountains could never provide, leaving me alone with the orchards and my German shepherd Lucy. That particular July had been merciless in its heat, with temperatures climbing past 95 degrees day after day without relief. The apple trees were stressed despite my best efforts at watering, and the spring that had fed our family for generations was running lower than I had ever seen it. My old Chevrolet pickup sat beside the barn, covered in dust from the parched conditions, and the radio in the kitchen played endless reports about wildfires raging across the western states and droughts spreading through the heartland. It was a Thursday evening around 11 at night when I first sensed that something was wrong. I had been in the barn checking on the chickens and making sure the doors were secured against the foxes that had grown bolder in recent months. Lucy had been with me as she always was, but suddenly she went rigid, her ears flattening against her skull, a low rumbling growl rising from deep in her chest. I set down the bucket I was carrying and knelt beside her. "What is it, girl?" I asked her softly. Lucy was not looking toward the house or the gravel road where a visitor might approach. She was staring at the orchard, specifically at the section where the oldest apple trees bordered the forest on the northern edge of my property. Those trees were nearly a century old, planted by my great-grandmother, and they formed a kind of boundary between the cultivated land and the wild country that stretched for miles into the mountains beyond. I retrieved my heavy flashlight from its hook by the barn door, the kind with a solid steel body that could serve as a weapon if necessary, and walked slowly toward the orchard. Lucy followed reluctantly, pressing close against my leg, rather than ranging ahead as she normally would when we walked the property together. The first thing I noticed was a smell that did not belong to my familiar landscape. It was not unpleasant exactly, but distinctly wild, like damp earth and hemlock, mixed with something musky that I could not quite identify. Something animal, but not like any animal I knew from these mountains. Then I heard movement among the trees, too heavy and deliberate to be deer or the black bears that occasionally wandered through looking for fallen fruit. Something large was moving through my orchard, and from the sound of it, moving carefully, trying not to be heard. "This is private property," I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "You need to show yourself, or I'm calling the sheriff right now." The movement stopped, For a long moment there was nothing but silence, except for Lucy's continued growling and the distant sound of crickets singing their oblivious summer songs. Then, slowly, the branches of the old apple trees parted, and I saw it. My mind struggled to make sense of what stood before me by forcing it into familiar categories. A bear standing on its hind legs, perhaps, or some person in an elaborate costume playing a cruel joke on a widow alone in the mountains. But as it stepped fully into the beam of my flashlight, there was no possible denial of what I was seeing. It stood perhaps 7.5 feet tall, covered in dark, reddish-brown hair that was lighter around its face and across its broad chest. The build was powerfully muscular, with shoulders that seemed impossibly wide and arms that hung down past where its knees would be. But it was the face that held me frozen where I stood, unable to run, unable to scream. Not quite human, not quite ape, but something that existed in a space between those categories that my education had never acknowledged. A heavy brow ridge shadowed deep-set eyes. The nose was flat and broad, and those eyes, catching my flashlight beam and reflecting it back with an amber glow, were studying me with an intensity that made it absolutely clear this was no mindless animal. There was intelligence there, awareness, assessment. It was deciding what to do about me, just as I was trying to decide what to do about it. Lucy had stopped growling and was now whimpering, pressing hard against my leg. She was a brave dog, had faced down coyotes and sent black bears running more than once. But she knew instinctively that this was something beyond her ability to handle. "Lord have mercy," I whispered, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The creature tilted its massive head at the sound of my voice. Not threatening, simply curious. Then it did something that made my breath catch in my throat. It raised one enormous hand, palm facing me, in what was unmistakably a gesture of peace, of greeting, of no intended harm. I stood there, a middle-aged widow in worn overalls and a faded work shirt, facing something that every textbook said could not exist, while my dog whimpered and the July cicadas droned their endless chorus in the humid darkness. Every rational instinct told me to run, to get to the house, to bar the doors and call someone, anyone. But who would I call? And what would I say? That Bigfoot was in my apple orchard. That I had finally lost my mind from grief and isolation, just like people in town had been whispering I might. Instead, guided by some instinct I could not name and did not try to understand, I slowly raised my own hand in response, mirroring the creature's gesture. It made a sound then, low and rumbling, almost like speech, but not quite. There were distinct sounds within it, deliberate patterns. It was trying to communicate with me. And then, to my absolute shock, it produced sounds that were clearly attempting to mimic English words, rough and heavily accented by vocal anatomy that was never designed for human speech, but recognizable despite that. No hurt, talk. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. It was not just intelligent. It understood English, or at least enough of it to form basic communication, and it wanted to speak with me. "You want to talk?" I asked carefully, my voice barely above a whisper. It nodded, an actual deliberate nod. Then it gestured toward the ground, a suggestion that we should sit. It was proposing that we have a conversation. This creature from the mountain wilderness and me, a farmer who had never traveled further than Charleston in her entire life. I should have refused, I should have run. But Robert had always said my curiosity would get me into real trouble someday. And perhaps he had been right all along. I found myself slowly lowering myself to sit on the grass beneath one of the old apple trees, keeping my flashlight angled to provide some illumination without blinding the creature, keeping Lucy close beside me. The creature sat as well, folding its massive legs beneath it in a manner that was disturbingly human, about 15 feet away from me. Close enough to talk, far enough not to seem threatening. "My name is Eleanor," I said, touching my chest with my free hand. Eleanor Dawson. The creature touched its own broad chest and made a sound. Wakota. Wakota, I repeated carefully. Is that your name? It nodded again, then pointed at Lucy. Dog. Yes, that is a dog. Her name is Lucy. Lucy. The creature's face did something that might have been the equivalent of a smile. Eleanor. Lucy. Good. And so began the most extraordinary night of my existence on this earth. What started as a simple exchange of names evolved into something far more complex than I could have imagined. Wakota's English was limited, but surprisingly functional, clearly learned from years, perhaps decades, of listening to humans from hidden places. My role became mostly listening as this being from the forest, this mystery that science insisted could not be real. Shared observations about humanity that had been accumulated over what I would come to learn was an extraordinarily long life. The conversation lasted nearly 5 hours, from that first encounter around 11 at night until the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn. We sat there in the grass of my orchard, farmer and forest dweller, while Wakota spoke in broken English, supplemented by gestures, sounds and drawings traced in the dirt with one massive finger. And what it told me, what it had observed about human beings over countless seasons of hidden watching, painted a picture of our species that was both humbling and terrifying in equal measure. But I am getting ahead of myself. That understanding, that terrible knowledge, came gradually over those 5 hours. It started with simpler things. Wakota's questions about me, about my life, about why I lived alone in this remote place with only a dog for company. Where family? It asked, gesturing around at the empty farmhouse visible in the moonlight, at the silent orchards, at the absence of other human beings. Gone, I said simply. My husband died. My children live in cities far away now. They have their own lives to live. Wakota made a sound that conveyed something like sadness, like understanding. Alone, bad, humans more alone now. What do you mean by that? I asked, and that was when it truly began. The sharing of observations that would occupy the remaining hours until dawn and would change my understanding of the world forever. Wakota began by asking about the land itself, gesturing at my orchards, the garden, the barn, the forested mountains beyond. How long you here? I was born here, I explained. My great-grandmother bought this land in 1912. My grandmother worked it, then my mother, then me. Over 80 years my family has lived on this property. The creature seemed to process this information, then held up its own hand, showing fingers multiple times in a pattern I could not immediately decipher. I hear more, much more, before grandmother's grandmother. I stared at it, trying to comprehend what it was telling me. You have been in these mountains for more than 80 years. How old are you? Wakota made a gesture that I interpreted as uncertainty about exact numbers, as though counting years was not something its people did in the same way humans did. Then it traced marks in the dirt. Many circles, many seasons, very old, perhaps ancient by human standards, though it moved with the fluidity of someone in their prime. I watch, it continued, tapping near its eyes with one massive finger. Long time watch humans change, always change. Its expression, if I was reading it correctly, seemed troubled by something. Change faster now, bad faster. What do you mean, bad faster? Wakota stood and walked to the nearest apple tree, running one enormous hand along the gnarled trunk that my great-grandmother had planted. Before humans come here, take some, leave more. Forest stay, animals stay, balance. It gestured broadly at my orchards, at the cleared fields beyond. Now humans take all, cut all trees, plant one thing, kill everything else. No balance. I felt defensive despite myself. This is how farming works now. We have to produce enough food to feed people. That requires efficiency, organization. Efficiency. Wakota repeated the word awkwardly, as though its mouth was not designed for such sounds. Hear that word. Humans say much now. Efficiency, productivity. More, more, more. It sat back down heavily, and I noticed for the first time how weary it seemed. But I watch humans work harder, have more things but happy less, alone more, sick more. The observation stung because I knew in my heart it was true. I thought about my grandmother's stories of harvest time, when neighbors would travel from miles around, helping each other bring in crops, sharing meals and music and stories that lasted late into the night. Now I harvested alone with machines, waving occasionally at distant neighbors as we passed on the gravel roads. Things have changed, I admitted quietly. We have technology now. Machines that make the work easier. Wakota's tone suggested deep skepticism. I watch you. Every day, morning to night, you work alone. Your husband die. Children leave. You work and work. It paused, those amber eyes studying me with uncomfortable intensity. This is easier? I had no good answer for that question. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of night insects and Lucy's occasional shifting beside me as she kept her wary eyes fixed on our visitor. Tell me what you have seen, I said finally. You have been watching us for so long. What have you observed about humans? Wakota settled into a position that suggested this would take considerable time, and began what would become a multi-hour discourse on human behavior, as observed by a hidden watcher who had studied our species for longer than I could truly comprehend. When I young, it began, humans different, live in small groups, know each other, help each other. Elders teach young, young care for elders, like my people. It gestured toward the dark forest behind us. We live long time, see many, many seasons. Elders know much, young ones listen, learn. But humans change, elders now. It made a gesture of pushing away, of rejection. Put in buildings, away from family. Young ones not learn from elders, learn from... It seemed to search for the right words, then pointed toward my farmhouse. From box, picture box. You mean television, I said. Television, not real people, pictures of people, voices of strangers. I thought about my own children, how they had grown up watching television more than talking to their grandparents. How I now spent evenings with the radio as my only companion, listening to voices from distant places rather than sitting with neighbors as my grandmother had done. And now, Wakota continued, I see new thing. People carry small boxes. It gestured to indicate something about the size of the new cellular phones that were becoming more common. The pages that some people in town had started carrying. Talk to boxes, look at boxes, even when with other people, look at boxes, not look at each other. I had seen this too, though it was not yet common in rural West Virginia. But on my occasional trips into Charleston for supplies I could not find locally, I had noticed business people with car phones pressed to their ears, teenagers at the mall hunched over portable game devices, the growing disconnection that seemed to exist even when people were physically together. Humans become like alone even when together, Wakota said, and there was genuine sorrow in its voice. This is new, this is bad. But we are more connected than ever before, I argued, though my heart was not in the argument. We have telephones, fax machines. The internet is starting to connect people all across the world. Connected? Wakota repeated the word, then shook its massive head slowly. I see you, Eleanor. You have telephone. How often you call children? I hesitated, not wanting to answer honestly. Sometimes. They are busy with their own lives. You alone. They alone, everyone alone, but say connected. It made a sound that might have been the creature equivalent of a bitter, knowing laugh. Words change, but I watch. I see truth. Over the next 2 hours, Wakota shared observation after observation, painting a picture of humanity that became increasingly unsettling with each new detail. It had watched families grow smaller across generations. Communities that once gathered regularly had fragmented into isolated households. People moved from place to place with increasing frequency, never putting down roots, never knowing their neighbors. It had witnessed forests cleared from mountainsides, rivers dammed and diverted, mountains literally torn apart for the coal beneath them. The environmental destruction was staggering when described through the eyes of one who had watched it happen over many decades. But what disturbed Wakota most was not the physical destruction. It understood that humans needed resources, needed to survive. What troubled this ancient being was something more subtle, more insidious. Humans forget how to be quiet, it said, and there was grief in those words. Always noise now. Machines, music, television, radio, always noise, never quiet, never listen. It tapped its chest, then its head. To inside, to heart, to mind, always noise outside, so never hear inside. I realized I could not remember the last time I had sat in complete silence. Even now, alone on the farm, I always had the radio playing or the television murmuring in the background, anything to fill the quiet that Robert's death had left behind. And forget how to wait, Wakota continued. Everything now fast. Fast food, fast cars, fast everything. No patience, no watching, no learning slow. It looked at me intently. My people, we watch, we wait, we learn slow, over long time, see patterns, see what is real, what is... It searched for a word. Temporary. Humans now see only temporary, only now, not see long patterns, not see where going. It gestured toward the dark forest, like running in dark forest, fast, fast, not see cliff ahead. What cliff? I asked, though part of me did not want to know the answer. Wakota was quiet for a long moment, and when it spoke again, its voice carried a weight that made the hair on my arms stand up despite the warm night. I see humans change in my lifetime, fast change. Used to humans live with world, take from forest, yes, but also give back. No forest. No animals, no plants, no when to take, when to leave alone, no balance. But now, humans live against world, see world as enemy, thing to control, thing to beat, poison bugs, poison plants, poison earth to make grow what you want. Cut down forest because trees in way, dam river because water in wrong place. It leaned forward, those amber eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. But world not enemy, Eleanor. World is home, only home, and humans making home sick, making home poison. But still think, we are smart, we control, we fix later. Later. It repeated the word with something like contempt. Always later. But I watch long time. I know. Later come faster than humans think. A chill ran through me despite the warm night. What do you mean? What have you seen? Summer's hotter now, Wakota said. Not just this summer, every summer. Little more hot. Winters less cold, less snow in mountains. Springs run lower. It gestured toward the forest. Forest changing, trees dying more, fires bigger, animals looking for water, coming closer to humans. I had noticed these things myself, had attributed them to normal variation, to cycles that would eventually reverse. But hearing them catalogued by a being who had watched these mountains for longer than my family had existed, the pattern became harder to dismiss. This is what I see, Wakota said slowly. Not sudden, not one big thing, many small things, adding up, building like... It seemed to search for an analogy. Like water behind dam, small crack, then bigger crack, then... It made a gesture of collapse, of catastrophic failure. I see this in world, many small cracks, in weather, in land, in water, in animals, and in humans too. In humans? Yes, Wakota's voice grew heavier. Humans have cracks too. More anger now, more fear, more distrust. People used to disagree but still talk, still work together. Now. It shook its head. Now people disagree and become enemies, cannot talk, cannot hear each other, cannot work together. I thought about the increasing polarization I had witnessed even in our small community. The way political discussions had become minefields, the way people who had been neighbors for decades now viewed each other with suspicion over differences that once would have seemed trivial. "And this is what scares my people most," Wakota continued. "Not the weather change, not the poison, not the dying forests. These are bad, yes, but humans could fix, could change, could adapt if what? If humans work together. If humans remember they are one family, all connected, all need each other." It stood and paced slowly, its massive form silhouetted against the stars. But humans forgetting this, forgetting how to work together, forgetting how to trust, forgetting how to sacrifice for group. Only think of self now, my family, my tribe, my country. Not see that all humans one tribe, all world one home. The creature turned to face me again. "When crisis come, and crisis will come, I see it building. When crisis come, humans will need each other like never before, need to work together, share, cooperate, help each other survive. But if humans forget how to do this, if humans only know how to fight, how to compete, how to be alone, then crisis will destroy, not because crisis too big, but because humans too divided, too alone, too..." It searched for a word. Broken. I sat with this for a long moment, feeling the weight of what Wakota was describing. A species at the peak of its technological power, more capable than ever of solving its problems, but simultaneously losing the social bonds and cooperative instincts that had allowed it to survive and thrive for millennia. "Why are you telling me this?" I finally asked. "Why talk to me? Why take this risk?" Wakota sat back down, and I sensed great weariness in its posture. "My people, we argue about humans, always argue. Some say, humans too dangerous, stay hidden. Let humans destroy themselves if that is their path, not our problem. But others say, world is our home too. If humans destroy world, we lose home too. And some humans different. Some humans can learn, can change, can remember old ways, maybe if we help. Share what we see, maybe help humans see danger before too late." It looked at me with those amber eyes that held such ancient intelligence. "I take risk talking to you. If my people know, they be angry, but I am old. I watch long time, and I think, if I not try to help, and humans destroy world, I will regret not trying." "Will I see you again?" I called out as it rose and began moving toward the forest edge, the sky now showing the first hints of grey on the eastern ridgeline. Wakota paused at the tree line. "Maybe, maybe not. But Eleanor, remember what I say. Tell others who will listen. Humans need to slow down. Be quiet. Listen to world. Listen to each other. Need to remember. You are all connected. All one family. What hurt one, hurt all." And then it was gone, disappearing into the forest as silently as it had come, leaving me sitting beneath my great-grandmother's apple tree as the sun rose on a world that suddenly seemed far more fragile and far more precious than it had the night before. I did not sleep that day. How could I? I sat on my porch as the sun climbed higher over the mountains, drinking coffee that had gone cold long ago, with Lucy at my feet, and my mind replaying every word, every gesture from those 5 hours before dawn. The rational part of my brain kept insisting it had been a dream, exhaustion-induced hallucination, anything but what I knew in my bones it had been. A real conversation with a being that was not supposed to exist, sharing observations that I could not dismiss, no matter how hard I tried. By afternoon, I had made a decision. I went into what had been Robert's study, a small room where he had kept books on everything from farming techniques to philosophy to natural history. Robert had been a reader, always had his nose in some book or another, always learning something new. I had teased him about it when he was alive, saying all his book knowledge did not help much with the practical work of running a farm. Now, I wished I had listened more carefully to what he had tried to share with me. I found an old notebook that Robert had used for farm planning with empty pages in the back, and I began writing down everything I could remember from my conversation with Wakota. Every observation the creature had made, every warning, every insight about the patterns it had witnessed over its long existence. My hand cramped after an hour, but I kept writing, terrified that I would forget details that seemed important. When I finished, I had 15 pages of notes that read like the ramblings of someone who had lost their grip on reality. I could imagine showing them to anyone, my children, neighbors, the pastor at the church I rarely attended anymore, and watching their expressions shift from concern to pity. "Mama has finally cracked," my daughter would say to my son. "Living alone up there in those mountains has gotten to her." But I knew what I had experienced. The question was, what was I supposed to do with this knowledge? For the next several days, I tried to return to my normal routines. I worked the orchard, tended the garden, did all the usual tasks that kept the farm running, but everything felt different now, seen through a new lens. When I looked at the cleared fields where forest had once stood, I saw them the way Wakota had described, ecosystems destroyed for efficiency. When I turned on the radio for evening company, I heard the creature's words echoing in my mind. Always noise, never quiet, never listened to inside. On the 5th day after the encounter, I drove into town to pick up supplies at the hardware store. While there, I ran into Martha Patterson, who owned a farm about 7 miles down the valley road. We had known each other for nearly 30 years, though we had never been particularly close. Just neighborly waves when we passed on the road, occasional help during emergencies like the big ice storm 3 winters back. "Eleanor," she greeted me at the counter where she was loading bags of feed onto a cart. "How are those apple trees holding up in this heat?" "Struggling," I admitted. "Been watering more than usual. Lost some of the older trees last month." "Same everywhere," she said, shaking her head. "My spring is running lower than I have ever seen it. Had to drill a new well last month and had to go way deeper than the old one. Something is changing with the groundwater around here." I thought about Wakota's words. Springs run lower, mountains drying, animals looking for water. "Martha," I said carefully, "you ever think about doing things differently? Maybe growing different crops, reducing the chemicals, letting some land go back to natural state?" She looked at me as though I had suggested setting money on fire. "Cannot make a living that way, Eleanor. Margins are already thin as paper. Need maximum production from every acre just to stay even." She paused, studying my face with concern. "I know it has been hard since Robert passed. You sure you are doing okay up there alone? Some people in town have been saying they are worried about you." There it was again. The assumption that questioning our methods meant something was wrong with me personally, not with the systems themselves. I drove home feeling more isolated than before. Who could I talk to? Who would listen? That evening, I found myself doing something I had not done since Robert died. I went into his library and started pulling books from the shelves, looking for something, though I was not sure what. Environmental science, Native American wisdom, systems thinking, community organizing. Robert had collected books on all of it, convinced that understanding the world required looking at it from many different angles. I had thought it was impractical, abstract, disconnected from the real work of farming. Now, with Wakota's observations echoing in my mind, I wondered if Robert had been seeing something I had been blind to all along. One book stopped me. Silent Spring, by Rachel Carson, published in 1962. Robert had talked about it. about how it had changed his thinking about pesticides and chemicals, but I had dismissed his concerns. That was 30 years ago, I had said. Farming is different now, safer, more scientific. I read it that night from cover to cover, and with every page I felt Wakota's presence, its observations echoing Carson's warnings. The interconnectedness of systems, the unforeseen consequences of our attempts to control nature, the arrogance of believing we could manage ecosystems without suffering repercussions for our ignorance. By 2 in the morning, I was reading another book from Robert's collection. The Unsettling of America by Wendell Berry, published in 1977. Berry wrote about industrial agriculture as a form of violence against the land and against rural communities. He wrote about how efficiency and profit had replaced stewardship and care. He wrote about the loss of community, the isolation of modern farming, the destruction of rural culture that had sustained families for generations. Everything Wakota had observed, these authors had documented decades ago, but they had been dismissed as alarmists, pessimists, obstacles to progress, just as I would be dismissed if I tried to share what I had learned, unless. An idea began forming in my mind. What if I did not claim to have spoken with a Bigfoot? What if I simply shared the observations themselves, framed as my own conclusions from a lifetime of living on this land? I had worked this farm for more than 50 years. I had seen changes that others were too young or too distracted to notice. I had credibility, at least locally. The next Sunday, I did something I rarely did anymore. I went to church, the small Baptist congregation in town where I had been baptized as a child, where Robert and I had been married, where I had not set foot since his funeral. Reverend Thompson gave a sermon about stewardship, about humans being caretakers of God's creation, not exploiters of it. And during the fellowship hour afterward, I approached him. "Reverend," I said quietly, "I would like to talk to you about something, about what we are doing to the land, to our communities, about what we are losing." Thompson was in his 60s, had been pastor of this congregation for over 2 decades. He knew everyone in the area and their grandparents before them. He listened as I shared my concerns about increasing isolation, the loss of community ties, the environmental degradation I was witnessing on my own land and throughout the region. I kept it vague, framed as personal observations, nothing about midnight conversations with forest creatures. "You sound like you have been reading Wendell Berry," he said with a knowing smile. "I have, actually. My late husband's books." "Robert was a thoughtful man," Thompson said, sipping his coffee. "What exactly are you proposing, Eleanor?" "Maybe a discussion group," I said. "People from the farming communities around here talking honestly about these issues, sharing concerns, thinking together about different approaches." Thompson considered this for a long moment. "You would be surprised how many people share these worries but feel they cannot voice them," he finally said. "Everyone is afraid of being seen as weak or as giving up or as not being a real farmer." He nodded slowly. "I think it is a good idea. We could host it here at the church, make it a community forum, a place where people feel safe to speak honestly." And so it began. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in early August, 18 people gathered in the church fellowship hall, farmers mostly, but also a few townspeople. A retired teacher, the woman who ran the feed store, the young couple who had recently taken over the hardware business from her father. I had expected maybe 5 or 6 people. The turnout caught me off guard. I started by sharing my observations, carefully framed as nothing more than what I had witnessed over my lifetime on the land. Declining water tables, increased chemical use, yet persistent pest problems, the loneliness of modern farming. Communities fragmenting as young people left and connections between neighbors grew thinner with each passing year. To my surprise, others immediately chimed in with their own experiences. Tom Chen, who ran a small cattle operation 2 valleys over, talked about soil depletion on his land, about how much more fertilizer was needed now compared to 20 years ago just to get the same results. James Bridger, a tobacco farmer whose family had worked these mountains for 5 generations, mentioned the crushing debt that was strangling small farms, how they were all on a treadmill of bigger equipment and higher yields just to stay even with the bank payments. Sarah Thompson, the pastor's wife who had been a nurse before she retired, spoke about mental health issues she had witnessed among farming families, the isolation and depression that seemed to be spreading through rural communities like a silent epidemic. "It is like we are all running faster and faster but getting nowhere," James said, and the weariness in his voice was something everyone in that room recognized. "And we cannot talk about it, because admitting we are struggling means we are failing." The meeting ran 3 hours. By the end, we had agreed to meet monthly to share not just concerns, but potential solutions, small changes, experimental approaches, support networks for families going through hard times. Walking to my truck in the gravel parking lot afterward, I felt something I had not experienced since Robert died. Hope. Not naive optimism, but the kind of hope that comes from people acknowledging hard truths together and refusing to pretend everything was fine when it clearly was not. Martha Patterson caught up with me before I reached my vehicle. "Eleanor, I will admit, I thought this was going to be some kind of hippie nonsense," she said. "But what you said about the soil, about the water table, I have been worried about those things too. I just did not want to admit it out loud." "None of us want to admit it," I said, "but I think we have to, for our own sake, and for what we are leaving behind for the next generation." She nodded slowly, her weathered face thoughtful in the dim light of the parking lot. "My son does not want the farm. Did I tell you that? He wants nothing to do with farming, says there is no future in it. Sometimes I wonder if he's seeing something we are too stubborn to look at." I thought about Wakota's words. Young ones not learn from elders anymore. "Maybe we need to learn from them too," I said. "Ask him what he sees that we are missing." That night, lying in bed with Lucy curled at my feet, I thought about my conversation with Wakota and this evening's gathering. I was doing what the creature had asked, sharing observations, encouraging people to look at patterns, questioning the direction we were heading. But I was doing it carefully, translating ancient wisdom into language my community could hear and accept. A week later, I found evidence that Wakota was still watching. Walking the fence line on the forest edge of my property at dusk, checking for damage from a storm that had passed through the night before, I found a small stack of stones deliberately placed in a way that nature alone would never produce. Beside it lay a carved piece of wood, showing a simple image. Multiple human figures standing together in a circle, a message, an approval, an encouragement to keep going. I picked up the carving and carried it home, placing it on my mantle next to a photograph of Robert. 2 sources of wisdom, 2 reminders of what mattered. Connection, community, caring for what we had been given instead of just taking what we could get. The monthly meetings continued through that fall and into winter. More people came as word spread through the mountain communities. We started sharing practical information. Cover cropping techniques that some of the older farmers remembered from their grandparents' practices. Reduced tillage methods that could save fuel and protect soil structure. Ways to diversify beyond the monocultures that left everyone vulnerable to single points of failure. We talked about mental health, about the importance of checking on neighbors, about creating networks of support for families going through hard times. It was not revolutionary, but it was something. Small changes, small resistance to the larger tide that Wakota had warned about. But I knew it was not enough. The larger patterns, the climate change, the resource depletion, the societal fragmentation, Those were not things a handful of West Virginia farmers could solve. Those required bigger changes, bigger awareness, and yet I thought about something Wakota had said during our conversation. If I not try to help, I will regret not trying. Maybe that was enough. Maybe doing what you could, where you were, with what you had, was all anyone could do. Maybe that was what stewardship really meant. Not grand gestures, but daily choices to care instead of exploit, to connect instead of isolate, to slow down instead of accelerating toward the cliff that Wakota had described. The community meetings had been running for 3 months when things took an unexpected turn. What had started as 18 concerned farmers and townspeople had grown to nearly 50 regular attendees. We had moved from the church fellowship hall to the community center to accommodate everyone. People were driving from neighboring counties, having heard through word of mouth about a group that was actually talking honestly about the challenges facing rural agriculture and mountain communities. But growth brought attention, and not all of it was welcome. I was in town at the feed store when I first encountered the pushback. Frank Morrison, a large-scale tobacco farmer who ran operations across 2 counties, and had fingers in the local bank as well, cornered me by the front door. "Heard about your little meetings, Eleanor," he said, his tone making it clear this was not a compliment. "Lot of talk about sustainable this and organic that. You know what that sounds like to the rest of us. Sounds like giving up. Sounds like going backward. It is about thinking long-term, Frank. About what we are leaving for the next generation. The next generation needs profitable farms, not hippie communes growing sprouts." He leaned closer, and I could smell whiskey on his breath, though it was barely past noon. "You are spreading doubt, undermining confidence, making young farmers think maybe they should quit. Go work in town. That what you want?" "I want people to have honest conversations about real problems," I said quietly, refusing to be intimidated. "About soil depletion, water scarcity, chemical dependency, the debt loads that are crushing everyone. Those are not problems, they are challenges. Challenges with solutions, better chemicals, better seeds, better technology. That has always been the answer, and it has worked pretty well so far." Frank jabbed a finger toward me. "Your husband read too many books, filled your head with nonsense, and now you are spreading it around. Do us all a favor and keep your doomsday preaching to yourself." He stalked out, leaving me standing there while other customers pretended they had not heard the confrontation. But I could feel their eyes, their uncertainty about whose side to take. In rural communities, going against the grain marked you as an outsider, a potential threat to the established order that everyone depended on. That evening, I walked to the forest edge where I had first met Wakota, carrying a flashlight and a folding chair. I had done this several times since our conversation, sitting quietly, hoping for another encounter, but never expecting one. The creature had made it clear that contact was dangerous for its people, that even our 5-hour conversation had been a significant risk. But tonight, as I settled into the chair and switched off my flashlight, I felt watched. Not threateningly, just observed. I sat in darkness for perhaps 20 minutes, listening to the October wind rustle through the turning leaves, watching stars appear in the deepening twilight. Then I heard a sound. That low rumble that was distinctly Wakota's vocalization. I turned slowly and saw a massive silhouette at the tree line, barely visible in the starlight. "I hoped you would come back," I said softly. Wakota moved closer, but remained standing this time, clearly not planning a long conversation. "You doing what I say, making humans talk together. Good." "Some humans do not like it," I admitted. "They think I'm causing trouble, undermining the system." "System," the creature's tone suggested contempt. "Humans always talk about system, economy system, agriculture system, political system, but system is thing humans made, not natural, can change system. But humans say cannot change. System is system." It made a gesture of frustration. My people have no system, have way of living. Way can change when world changes, flexible. Humans make rigid system, then world changes. But humans say cannot change system, so system breaks, and humans break with it. I thought about Frank Morrison's anger, about the rigid adherence to industrial agriculture, even as evidence mounted that it was unsustainable. How do we change? I asked. If the system punishes those who try to do things differently. This is test, Wakota said. Test of courage, easy to follow, hard to lead, hard to try new way when everyone say, old way is only way. It moved closer, and I could see its eyes reflecting ambient light. But Eleanor, you must understand. Time is short, change coming faster now, weather more extreme, water more scarce, soil more dead. If humans not change soon, world will force change, and forced change is violent, painful. What can I do? I am one person, one small farmer in West Virginia. The problems you are describing are global. Every human say this. I am small. What can I do? It paused, then gestured broadly at the forest, at the stars, at the vast landscape around us. But world is made of small. Every tree in forest is one tree. Every drop in river is one drop. But together, it spread its massive arms. Together is forest. Together is river. If every human say I am too small, then nothing changes. But if many humans, each doing small things, choosing different way, it left the thought unfinished. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then Wakota said something that sent a chill through me. Eleanor, you must prepare. Next few years, changes accelerate. Summers hotter, fires bigger, storms stronger. Some humans will see, will understand. Many will not see, will say just bad luck, just temporary. You must be voice saying, this is pattern, this is warning, even when others not want to hear. You're talking about climate change, I said. Scientists are warning about it, but most people think it is exaggerated, something that will not affect us for decades. Already affecting, Wakota interrupted. I see it. Every season, small changes adding up in 5 years, 10 years, everyone will see, but then maybe too late for gentle change. Only violent change left. It began backing toward the forest. Keep talking to humans, keep building community when hard times come, and they will come. Humans need community, need to remember how to help each other, how to share, how to work together. This is most important thing. Technology cannot save humans, if humans cannot work together. Will I see you again? I called out as it reached the tree line. Wakota paused. Maybe, maybe not, but I am always watching. When you feel alone, remember, you are not alone. I watch. My people watch. We see humans who try to do right thing. It seemed to search for words. We hope for you, hope you succeed. Because if humans destroy world, we lose home too, all connected, all one family, even if different species. And then it was gone, melting into the forest darkness. I sat there for a long time afterward, processing what felt like a farewell. Perhaps Wakota had taken all the risk it could justify. Perhaps our paths would never cross again, but its words echoed in my mind. You are not alone. We hope for you. The next morning, I made a decision that would define my remaining years. I began transforming my farming operation, using my own land as a demonstration project for the principles that Wakota and the books had taught me. I reduced my cultivated acreage by 1/3, letting that land revert to native meadow with wildflowers and grasses that had grown in these mountains before European settlement. I stopped using most pesticides, accepting that I would have lower yields but healthier soil. I planted hedgerows and created habitat for birds and beneficial insects along the boundaries between fields. My neighbors thought I had lost my mind. My bank officer expressed serious concern about productivity and loan payments, but I persisted, documenting everything, measuring soil health, tracking water retention, observing the wildlife that began to return. By the following spring, something remarkable was happening. Yes, my apple yield per tree had decreased somewhat, but my input costs had dropped significantly. Less fertilizer, less pesticide, less fuel for equipment I no longer needed to run. And the meadow section I had restored was teaching me things I had forgotten, things my great-grandmother might have known, but that industrial agriculture had erased from our collective memory. How many species of native plants had once grown on this mountainside? How they supported intricate webs of insects, birds, and small mammals. How they held soil against erosion and captured water in ways my monoculture orchards never could. I started hosting farm tours, showing other farmers what I was doing. Not preaching, just showing. Some dismissed it as the foolish experiments of a grieving widow who had too much time on her hands. But others, especially younger farmers struggling with debt and environmental concerns, saw possibilities. The community meetings evolved too. We started a seed library, preserving heritage apple varieties and vegetable strains that were not dependent on chemical inputs. We organized work shares, helping each other with projects that seemed overwhelming when faced alone. We created a mental health support network, acknowledging the depression and anxiety that rural isolation fostered, connecting people with resources and with each other. Sarah Thompson, the retired nurse, started documenting our local history, interviewing elders about farming practices from decades ago, before industrial agriculture came to dominate these mountains. What emerged was a rich repository of knowledge about drought-resistant techniques, pest management without chemicals, community mutual aid systems that had been forgotten in the rush to modernize. One evening in late May of 1995, nearly a year after my first conversation with Wakota, I was working in the restored meadow section of my property, identifying plants and recording observations in a notebook. The sunset was spectacular, painting the mountain ridges in oranges and purples, and the air was filled with the sound of birds and insects that had been absent from my farm for years. I felt it before I saw it, that sense of being watched. I turned slowly, and there at the forest edge stood Wakota, backlit by the setting sun. But it was not alone. Two smaller figures stood with it. Juveniles, perhaps, or young adults of its kind. It was showing me to its own people, demonstrating that not all humans were threats. I raised my hand in greeting. All three figures raised their hands in response. Then they were gone, melting back into the shadows of the forest. But the message was clear. My efforts had been witnessed, acknowledged, approved. I was no longer just Eleanor Dawson, struggling widow running a farm alone in the mountains. I was part of something larger, a bridge between species, between old wisdom and new understanding, between the world that was dying and the world that might yet be saved. That night, I wrote in my journal words that I would return to many times in the years that followed. A being that supposedly does not exist showed me more truth about the human condition in 5 hours than most people learn in a lifetime. It taught me that real courage is not standing against obvious evil. It is standing against the comfortable and the profitable when you know they are wrong. It is choosing long-term survival over short-term gain. It is building community when isolation is easier. It is planting trees whose fruit you will never taste. I did not know then that those words would someday be read by my grandchildren in a world that had indeed changed in the ways Wakota had predicted. Some changes terrible, some hopeful, all demanding the kind of adaptability and community that ancient being had tried to teach me.